All right, so today we're going to start a new teaching. It's called Darkness and Light. Darkness and Light. And as we begin this teaching, I want to first kind of mention a few things. So a lot of you have said, well, I want to go deeper. Well, this might be considered deeper. I don't know. But I think that what you have to understand is that as we go through these teachings, and I noticed this as I was putting the teaching together, you're going to find that in these teachings that we do, a lot of the same verses are going to come up. But we're going to start getting additional understandings or applications of the same verses. So a lot of you are sitting there going, oh, I've heard this before when I go to a verse you're familiar with. If I go to Ephesians 2 or Deuteronomy 8 or some other thing at some point or wherever I go to verses, but you should know all of this stuff anyway. Rav Shaul, being a student of Gamaliel, had to have basically, for the way we understand it, the entirety of the Tanakh, or at least the Chumash, memorized. Because after all, they didn't all have Bibles like we do on their phones or physically in books that they could just grab a hold of. They had to memorize the scrolls. And so they had to be very familiar with all the material. So just to remind you of where my position is on this, I'm going to quote Peter from 2 Peter, because he expresses that concern very clearly in chapter 1 in verse 12. He says, "And so I intend to remind you of these matters again and again, though you know them." Oh, but I want new stuff, and I want interesting, and I want to go find teachings I've never heard before. And he said, well, this is Kepha. So you're going to decide you don't want to listen to Kepha because he's reminding you stuff you should already know? If Kepha was still around and you were one of his students, would you just say, I've heard all your stuff, Kepha. I want to go find somebody else now? See, I don't think you would do that. He said, I intend to remind you of these things again and again, though you know them and have been established in the present truth. But I think it is right, as long as I am in this body, in this tent, to stir you up by a reminder. Okay? So that is one of the roles of the teacher, is not just to instruct you or to teach you things you don't know, but to also remind you of what you do know. And then the role of the prophet would be to stir you to action in the things that you do know. Okay, to cry aloud and spare not and say, hey, that stuff you know, let's get about doing it. Or that stuff you know you shouldn't be doing, let's knock it off. That's how those roles go from teacher to prophet. Okay? And so here we're going to go through this idea of darkness and light, and we're going to be doing it through, we'll begin in Genesis, and we're going to work our way through to Revelation pretty much. And we're going to cover a bunch of things, but I want us to understand that as we're looking at verses, we're absolutely going to be hitting verses that we hit in the last series and the series before that and the series before that in teachings, because those verses still cover the same idea with other or additional elements now being focused on. So as we look at the same verses we've looked at, now we're going to be looking at some parts of them that we didn't focus on as much. Now we're going to focus and zoom in a little bit more on a particular aspect. So you may consider that, for those of you that want to be deeper, that's deeper. Okay, you're going to zoom in and focus on an element of something that you weren't focusing on as much before because you were focusing on a different element of the same verse, okay? So let's begin in Genesis chapter 1, and right at the very beginning in verse 1. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth became to be formless and empty, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of Elohim was moving on the face of the waters. And Elohim said, let light come to be, and light came to be. And Elohim saw the light, that it was good, and Elohim separated the light from the darkness. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there came to be evening, and there came to be morning the first day. So we're not going to explain this stuff yet. We're just going to hold on right there. And then continuing in verse 14, it said, Elohim said, let lights come to be in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and appointed times and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens that give light on the earth. And so it came to be so. And Elohim made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And Elohim set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And Elohim saw that it was good, and it came to be evening, and it came to be morning the fourth day. All right, so these are the first two places that we deal with the idea of light and darkness, okay? So go back to Genesis 1, and we're going to go back to that beginning part in verse 2. Now, as we're looking at this, we're also going to allow Scripture to define our terms. And I think we're going to find that darkness is a natural state at the beginning. Okay, so let's not just focus on Enoch or Jubilees and this and that and the other thing, that what happened to cause this tohu vabohu. I think the idea that, well, let's stop for a second. All Scripture, all of the way the communication has come from above has been through what's called parables. We're told that by Yeshua himself and by Yahweh, that he speaks in parables, which means that while there is a literal, there's also a allegorical or a message to be gleaned out of. And so what he's trying to tell us and glean out of, this is that deeper stuff, right? Out of the idea that there was tohu vabohu, formless and empty, in verse 2, and darkness was on the face of the deep, is that darkness is a state that things begin out of. Okay? And that's something that we can see. When you're born, you come out of darkness, out of the womb, into the light. Okay? It's a state of coming out from. We're going to see this consistently through the journey of life when you come from going out of the worldly thought process into the Torah-based, covenanted-based thought process. Again, you're coming out of darkness into light. Okay? So darkness is a natural state at the beginning of a process. A place where something is birthed from. A place where something is hidden for later revealing. So it's also a place that not only can be birthed out of, but also can be on purpose to conceal something to be revealed later. Okay, we're going to see that also play through. By the way, this can be a frightening place. Because being in that hidden place, waiting for the revealing, seeking revealing, it's not fun to be in the dark. You know, that's a phrase we use as an idiomatic phrase. When somebody talks to you, you might say, well, I'm completely in the dark about that. It means that I don't have the revelation. I don't understand. I don't have the enlightenment. I don't have the information or whatever it is that I need to be able to function here. I'm in the dark. I'm missing pieces that I need to go forward. Those pieces are hidden in the dark. Okay? A place devoid of actively useful light. So we're going to see darkness also as a place where there is no actively useful light. Light cannot be closed over by darkness. So when you're in darkness, that means there's no actively useful light. Because if there was, you would be able to see the light. Okay? Okay, now, we did an experiment once, I don't remember, this was probably in a multi-level marketing thing at a big conference, and they were trying to make a point about how one person can affect so much or a little bit of how much light can do. And we were probably in a room that held 3,000 or 4,000 people, and they turned out all the lights, but everybody had candles, and they were lit. And then everybody turned them off and put them out except one person on the stage. You know what? That one candle still lit up the whole room. That one little light still gave light to the entire huge room. You could still see from that one little light. And so darkness is a place devoid of actively useful light, functioning light, okay? Darkness is also a barrier to keep something in or out. So it provides a separator or a barrier to keep something in or out. And the greater the darkness, the greater the light to be revealed. This is something we will also learn out of the Scripture. The greater the darkness, the greater the light to be revealed. Okay, for darkness, the Hebrew word for darkness is choshech, and for light is or. Okay, so we have those words there for you. Okay, so these are the definitions. These are sort of the parameters that we're going to try to explore through the teaching, is understanding this relationship, okay? Now later we'll get into more explanations as we start to see what light actually does. And we'll see that through the verses. So let's now go back to verse 2. So the earth came to be, tohu vabohu, and darkness was on the face of the deep. So the earth is formless, empty, there's darkness, so there's no light yet. Okay, there's no light yet. Hold your place here and go to Jeremiah chapter 4. In Yirmiyahu in Jeremiah chapter 4. Jeremiah 4:22. For my people are foolish, they have not known me, they are stupid children, and they have no understanding. By the way, for those of you that think that I am mean and harsh and say all kinds of, rude and inconsiderate things, I didn't write this. I'm just reading it to you. For my people are foolish and they have not known me. They are stupid children. And they have no understanding. They are wise to do evil, but to do good they have no knowledge. I looked at the earth and saw it was formless and empty. In the heavens they had no light. I looked at the mountains and saw they shook, and all the hills were swaying. I looked and saw there was no man, and all the birds of the heavens had fled. I looked and saw the garden land was a wilderness, and all its cities were broken down at the presence of Yahweh by his burning displeasure. For thus said Yahweh, all the earth shall be a ruin, but I shall not make a complete end. On account of this, let the earth mourn and the heavens above be dark, because I have spoken, because I have purposed and shall not relent, nor do I turn back from it. So this is not Genesis 1. This is way later into the story. But yet, what do we notice is happening here? It becomes tohu vebohu because it doesn't have actively useful light. We're going to see that when he brings light into the world, this is not day 4 when we get sun, moon, and stars. This is going to be happening here on day 1. And so this light that comes in is, we're going to see, is Yeshua. It's Torah. It's his presence coming in to illuminate in the darkness, to bring order, to bring structure. And so the world had now become, by Jeremiah's time, Yahweh saying the world is going to become a place that has completely gone into chaos and confusion, lacking order, lacking structure, not following and submitting into what the Creator had intended. Therefore, actively useful light is missing. This is what happened in the days of the flood. This is what's going to happen when we get to the tribulation, that causes the world to have its upheavals, that causes him to have to intervene before we destroy ourselves. Because this world cannot survive without actively functioning light. You cannot survive without actively functioning light in you. As we define these terms, we'll get to see more. But I want you to see that this is in Jeremiah, directly referring to the exact same kind of thing happening in Genesis 1. Now notice that it's connected to the stupid children, foolish people that don't have understanding, that are wise to do evil, but to do good they have no knowledge. So there's some sort of connection between wisdom and knowledge of the Almighty and light. And the foolish rejection of doing evil instead, rejecting light, rejecting what's good, rejecting what's coming from above, that brings this chaos, confusion, darkness. Okay? And so that kind of lines up right there. Now let's go back to Genesis 1. So in verse 3, Elohim brings light into that darkness. Right? Verse 2 it says, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And Elohim then says, let light come to be, and light came to be. So he brings light now into a place that is darkness, devoid of light, and chaotic and confused, without structure, without form. So bear in mind that when you define tohu v'bohu, a lot of it has to do also with just the idea of it being formless, without structure. And so we can find ourselves in that state. Matter of fact, you were in that state before he called you to a certain degree. It's his understanding that brings structure and form to the creation. So now he brings that into existence at the very beginning, and he says, let light come to be, and light came to be. And Elohim saw the light that it was good, and Elohim separated the light from the darkness. So now he's going to make a separation so we understand that there's a difference between light and darkness. Okay? In verse 4, he says it was good. Now we have to understand there's a teaching I did called Well Done, Good and Trustworthy Servant. You might want to go listen to the part 1 that talks about the definition of good. But Yeshua tells us there is none good but one, and that is the Father. So we know that for the light to be good, it needs to be of the Father. Okay, things to be good have to be completely in line with the way the Father intended it to be. When things are functioning as intended, they are good. When you are functioning as intended, you are good. When you're not, you are evil. You are now doing what he purposed in a bent, twisted, or maybe you're not doing it at all as he intended. That is evil. And so now he separates the two. And in verse 5, Elohim lets us know that day will be the metaphor. From now on, we're going to have these metaphors that we're going to be using. He's not just naming it by calling light day and darkness night, but he's also teaching us going forward as a metaphor that when we see the phraseology, when we see the term day and night, we can use them for light and darkness. Okay, he's instructing us on how to understand his terms going forward. You know, there's a rule called the rule of first mention. In the rule of first mention, the Jews, that they've studied the word for thousands of years, literally, have identified that you can learn much, if not most, of the things that you need to learn about anything in Scripture by seeing where it's first mentioned. That he teaches us a tremendous amount about each thing the first time he mentions it. So this is the first time he's mentioning day and night. It's the first time he's mentioning light and darkness. And so we're learning, and he says that day will now be the metaphor for light, and night will now be the metaphor for darkness, okay? And so that we can now use that knowledge as we read other verses going forward, that occasionally we're going to know, depending on what he's talking about, he may literally be talking about daytime or nighttime, but depending on what he's talking about, we can say, oh, he's trying to make a teaching here about light and darkness, and making that point to us so we can see it, okay? So then we go back to Genesis 1:14, and the sun and the moon were put in place to do what? To rule over day and night, and to separate light from darkness. Okay? He says that in verse 18. He says, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness, and Elohim saw that it was good. So this is important that we're starting to get these kind of parameters as we balance things out. Okay, so now we've got our basic understanding. Darkness is a place where things are hidden, waiting to be revealed. They're devoid of actively useful light. It's a place where something can be birthed out of. It's a natural beginning point. There is a barrier aspect to it as well. That's why we have something to separate the darkness and the light, and that we understand that the greater the darkness, the greater the light to be revealed. So now, with that understanding, let's now start looking at some things going forward, and we'll go to Exodus chapter 10. Exodus chapter 10, and we're dealing now with the plagues. Okay, and we're in verse 21. And Yahweh said to Moshe, stretch out your hand toward the heavens, and let there be darkness over the land of Mitzrayim, even a darkness which is felt. So darkness can be felt. Remember, it's devoid of active light. So you're going to feel the chaos, the confusion, the lack of structure. You're going to feel the frightening place of knowing that things are hidden and you don't know what's going to be revealed yet. It's a scary place at times. So this darkness could actually be felt. And Moshe stretched out his hand toward the heavens, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Mitzrayim for 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days, while all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. So now notice that the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. So they had a connection to covenant. They had a connection to the Creator. They had the beginnings, the birthings of structure. Remember, at this point, we've had already a bunch of plagues. At this point, they've already seen the hand of Yah. At this point, they're waking up to their heritage and to who they are while they've been enslaved for all this period of time. And so they have light being birthed in the darkness of the slavery place. And so they have light while the others do not. Of course, we could also link the idea of 3 days, and of course, Yeshua was in the ground 3 days and other things. We're not going to go there now, but you have that hinted at here as well. Okay? And of course, when he came out of the grave after 3 days and 3 nights, it birthed the beginnings of the restoration of the houses of Israel and the beginnings of the next phase of the plan of eternity. Okay? So darkness can be felt, and light was in Israel's dwellings. And so this is an important piece that we're now seeing, that he's separating. Also, remember, he uses certain elements to separate light and darkness. So he said, there's darkness in the world, represented by Mitzrayim, Egypt, and there's light in the covenanted people. Because remember, later we're going to see there's verses, I think we'll cover it, where it says that, you're a light on the hill. You're a city to be as a light on the hill. And that light is to be a light to the world. This is the purpose of the nation of Israel. Just like in Genesis 1, he brings light into the world, into the creation. He now has a people designed to be a light, to exemplify his teachings and instructions, his order, his structure, his processes. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 4. And some of these things will flow better, some won't, in terms of the continuity of flow here, but I'm kind of taking it as chronologically as I can. Deuteronomy chapter 4. Now bear in mind, we've already heard the idea of thick darkness mentioned in Exodus. We're going to see this again in Deuteronomy 4. We'll begin in verse 1. And now, O Israel, listen to the laws and the right rulings which I am teaching you to do, so that you live and shall go in and possess the land which Yahweh Elohim of your fathers is giving you. Do not add to the word which I command you, and do not take away from it, so as to guard the commands of Yahweh your Elohim which I am commanding you. So what did he just say to you in verse 1 and 2? He says, now Israel, listen to the light. I'm giving you light, I'm giving you structure. I'm giving you something that actively pushes away darkness and brings illumination. Guard this so that you can live and go in and possess. So he's giving you a little bit of a hint here before we get to the parts that deal with darkness. Verse 3, and your eyes have seen what Yahweh did at Baal Peor, for Yahweh your Elohim has destroyed from your midst all the men who follow Baal Peor. But you who are clinging to Yahweh your Elohim are alive today, every one of you. See, I have taught you laws and right rulings as Yahweh my Elohim commanded me to do thus in the land which you go to possess. Now, bear in mind here, he's saying, look, you saw what happened at Baal Peor. You saw who's here and who's not here, who made it through. Those that embraced light and not darkness. Darkness exemplifies that does not have and is not submitted to the structure of the Almighty. Before the Almighty had structure in it, the universe was tohu vabohu. He then placed his light in it and gave it structure and order. He's saying, those of you who embrace that, who are clinging to Yahweh. How do you cling to Yahweh? By the covenant, which is to hear and do. Everything I say, you shall do. And the people all said, amen, amen. Okay, so here, those that were clinging to that were alive. So we're also going to see that darkness has death in it, darkness has all that other mess in it, but light brings life. He says, you are clinging, and also that not only brings life, but life specifically, the metaphor is always about possessing the land or going into the land is the metaphor for the kingdom eternally. So we're seeing them physically here doing certain things that are metaphors for the ultimate, what we're looking forward to. How did they get to go into the physical land? The same way we get to go into the eternal kingdom, by clinging to Yahweh. And he says, look, I've taught you these right rulings as Yahweh taught me to, commanded me to do. Verse 6, and you shall guard and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding before the eyes of the peoples who hear all these laws, and they shall say, only a wise and understanding people is this great nation. Now bear in mind, this is the opposite of what we read in Jeremiah chapter 4. There was no wisdom, they were stupid, they were foolish, and they were not submitted to that light. For what great nation, verse 7, is there which has Elohim so near to it, as Yahweh or Elohim is to us whenever we call on him? And what great nation is there that has such laws and righteous right rulings, like all this Torah which I set before you today? So he's saying, where is a nation that has such structure, that has such light to illuminate how to behave towards each other, how to behave towards your Creator, how to function as the created being that he made you to be? Everybody else is walking around in darkness. They don't know how to be a man or how to be a woman or how to be a covenanted community or how to be in relation to their Creator or how to be a parent. They don't know how to do anything. They are in darkness. Have you noticed the world is chaos and confusion? On any topic you could ask the world, they're going to give you 75 different answers on how to do everything because they don't agree, they don't know. They're all guessing and doing whatever's right in their own eyes. Now, of course, there's still groups of people out there trying to find reasons and excuses to do away with or diminish the amount of Torah. But he says, look, What great nation is it that has such laws and right rulings like all this Torah which I set before you today? Bear in mind, Deuteronomy does come after Exodus. It is further along in the process. They are further along from Mount Sinai. This is before they're crossing the Jordan. I didn't mean that it comes literally after Exodus, but you understand it's chronologically later, which means that this is after the golden calf. This is after whatever laws were added as the Melchizedekian teachers would try to claim are against you and all this other nonsense. Okay, it's all utter nonsense. He's saying, look, what great nation is there that has all of this great stuff that I'm sharing with you today? And that was all of it. That wasn't limited to just what was said in the Ten Commandments or just what was said, on Sinai in the initial couple of chapters before the quote-unquote golden calf thing. It includes it all at this point. It includes everything that was written in the book that was outside the ark. And of course, I still hear people teaching that because it was outside the ark, it was done away with. That's the stuff that was done away with. The stuff that was inside the ark is the only stuff that's important. It was outside the ark because you didn't have permission to open the ark. How else were you going to have access to it if it was inside the ark? How many verses do you see where people open the ark? Hey, let me go open the ark and check out, make sure that we got the right number 6 on the commandments, or number 5, or number 4, or whatever it is. No, they went to the book outside the ark where it was all written down. That was their copy for their use. The stuff in the ark was locked up, sealed, and left that way. After the manna was put in there and Aaron's rod and the other things and the tablets, all that, I don't see any verses where anybody ever opens it up. And so here we have what we have because that's where it was placed for us to have access to it. Okay? Now, he says, and what great nation is there that has such laws and righteous right rulings like all this which I set before you this day? Verse 9, only guard yourself and guard your life diligently, lest you forget the words your eyes have seen, unless you turn aside from your heart all the days of your life, and you shall make them known to your children and your grandchildren. Notice he says, forget the words your eyes have seen. The things that he's talking about have been illuminated. They're visible. You saw them in practice. You saw them from the beginning in Egypt, is what he's saying to them. You saw how the plagues went and how he brought the people out of another nation. He said, where have you ever heard of a nation being taken out of another nation like such a thing has happened here? They saw the miracles of the splitting of the sea. They saw the miracles of the pillar of fire, the pillar of cloud, the manna, the quail, etc. They saw all of these things. He says, your eyes have seen that this stuff is and that it works and it brings order and structure, blessing and cursing when you don't do it, blessing when you do, right? He says, guard yourself and guard your life because it's life connected to light, okay? He says, the day when you stood before Yahweh, your Elohim in Horeb, Yahweh said to me, assemble the people to me, and I make them hear my words so that they learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth and teach them to their children. And of course, the previous verse said that they should be in your heart all the days of your life, and you shall teach them to your children and your grandchildren. In other words, generationally, it was supposed to be passed down. He said, you came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire to the heart of the heavens, darkness, cloud, and thick darkness. Okay, so now we're told that when they got to the mountain and they were going to receive that, remember we said that the greater the darkness, the greater the light. Well, this sounds like some great darkness here. It says darkness, cloud, and thick darkness. The people were afraid. They didn't know what was going to come out of all that darkness. But the greater the darkness, the greater what is going to be revealed. Yahweh spoke to you out of the midst of the fire, and you heard a voice, words, but saw no form, and you only heard a voice. And he made known to you his covenant, which he commanded you to do, the 10 words, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. So we have such a great light that it's like a fire. Okay, there's a fire that's illuminating. He says, and Yahweh commanded me at that time to teach you laws and right rulings for you to do them in the land which you pass over to possess. Therefore, diligently guard yourselves, for you saw no form when Yahweh spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire. So now he's saying, look, there's that which is revealed and that which remains hidden. However, our obsession with knowing everything, we have this sort of Gnostic sort of bent. We have to know, we have to understand. And by the way, as Olympic conclusion jumpers, we have this need to fill in all available empty spaces that we don't know what goes in it. So we go ahead and fill it in. So since we have not seen his form, we're going to go ahead and make a form. We're going to attribute a form to him. We have to have something to fill in that space. Well, you really don't have to have that, but we as human beings feel that need. He says, look, don't do that. You didn't see a form. He says, so don't, therefore, do corruptly and make yourselves one. Accept that reality. The reality is he at that point had not decided to reveal that aspect of himself, the physical form. He revealed his character. He revealed his instructions. He revealed the order and structure that creation and the universe needed to be in. He just did not feel it necessary at that point, for whatever reason, to reveal his physical form. So he says, oh, no. Diligently guard yourselves, for you saw no form when Yahweh spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire, lest you should do corruptly and shall make yourselves a carved image in the form of any figure, the likeness of a male or a female or any beast, etc., etc., he says, because you're trying to impose something that he has chosen not to give. So what he's trying to tell you is, you need to be satisfied with what is revealed. This is tough. You need to be satisfied with what he reveals. Oh, well, I've heard that teaching and blah, blah, blah. You know what? By the way, I'm going to ask everyone who ever says that to me, so be prepared. Are you doing it? I know you've heard it. I'm sure you've heard it, but are you doing it? Oh, I've heard that teaching on Shabbat before, and I've heard that one on feast before. I've heard that, but are you doing it? I've heard that one on the heart, and I've heard that one on clinging, but are you doing it? Because he's saying to diligently guard yourselves to make sure you're actually doing or not doing. Diligently. Because he doesn't want you to make an image, the likeness of any beast, a winged bird, etc., the likeness of creatures that creep. He says, verse 19, unless you lift up your eyes to the heavens and shall see the sun and the moon and the stars and all the hosts of the heavens, and you be drawn away into bowing down to them and serving them, which Yahweh your Elohim has allotted to you, to all the peoples under all the heavens. See, so what's happening is we want to be able to point at our Creator. Well, it's the trees. Well, it's the sun. Well, it's the moon. Well, it's this thing we made in this calf, and it's this other stone figure. We want to be able to point at and say, there he is. There's our Elohim. Because out of that frustration is ultimately you'll just look up at the sun and the moon and the stars and start worshiping them. Don't do that, he says. He says, but Yahweh has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Mitzrayim, to be his people, as an inheritance, as it is today. Okay? So bear in mind that this great revelation, and I wanted to read through all of that, is because he's trying to give you that light-darkness thing again. Out of the darkness, the cloud, and the thick darkness, he then revealed all of this information. He revealed himself. We heard a voice. The people were experienced, and actually the legend goes that they felt it, they tasted it, they heard it, they saw it. Because they said that they saw the words. Full sensory experience. But that was all revealed out of darkness. Let's go to chapter 5. We'll stay here in Deuteronomy in verse 22. And this is continuing the theme. So these words Yahweh spoke to you, to all your assembly in the mountain in the midst of the fire, of the cloud, and the thick darkness. See, we're still in that same place. With a loud voice, and he added no more. And he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone and gave them to me. And it came to be when you heard the voice from the midst of the darkness, while the mountain was burning with fire, that you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders, and said, see, Yahweh our Elohim has shown us his esteem and his greatness, and we have heard his voice from the midst of the fire. Today we have seen that Elohim speaks with man and he lives. And now why should we die? So the people are now, remember I said out of darkness, the hidden can be revealed, but sometimes this is frightening to people. Especially when you don't see the form, you just hear the voice. And we're talking about a darkness that was thick darkness, probably a darkness that could be felt. Even though there was a fire, there still was a darkness that wasn't being penetrated. And then there was a voice. He says, and now why should we die? For this great fire is consuming us. And by the way, the fire that's consuming them is the voice, it's everything it's not literally a physical fire burning down the mountain that they're worried about is going to come and burn the camp. If we hear the voice of Yahweh or Elohim anymore, then we shall die. For who is there of all flesh who has heard the voice of the living Elohim speaking from the midst of the fire as we have and does live? Well, that's a dumb question. Who had ever heard the voice of the living Elohim coming out of a fire and didn't live? In other words, this has never happened before. And so, it's kind of a dumb question, but they're afraid. They're now, instead of having a fear of him, they're afraid of him. You understand the difference? Having a awe and reverence and respect, a fear of disappointing, they're afraid of instead of having a fear, the proper fear of Yahweh. They're afraid of him like somehow they're going to die. Instead of having awe, fear, and reverence that he is the source of life. So they say, you go near and hear all that Yahweh or Elohim says and speak to us all that Yahweh or Elohim says to you, and we shall hear and do it. So now they're panicking. They're wanting Moses to intervene. But notice that's because that's how powerful this revealing of light was out of darkness. And what light was revealed out of the darkness? The Torah. Yahweh's voice, Yahweh's instructions. This is the light. Now that light was brought into the universe, into the world, starting in Genesis 1 and the day 1. Beginning in verse 2. Verse 3 when he brings light in. We're just not having it codified until Exodus 20, and now we're having it restated here in Deuteronomy. It doesn't get codified and written down. This is why it's no surprise that Cain and Abel should have known the right way to do sacrifices, to make offerings. There's no surprise that other things are happening, like Noah knowing what is clean and unclean animals. When he puts them on the boat, how did he know to put 7 pairs of the clean and 1 pair of the unclean? Because light had already been brought in to the universe. And we're going to see over and over in other verses, we're going to learn that Yeshua is light, that he's the light of the world. We're going to see other things that when we get to the book of John, etc., they're going to really make this, it's going to illuminate this for you. Okay, it's going to make this more clear so you can see it, using more visual metaphors. Okay, so they told him, you go near and hear all that Yahweh or Elohim says and speak to us all that Yahweh or Elohim says to you, and we shall hear and do it. And Yahweh heard the voice of your words when you spoke to me, and Yahweh said, I have heard the voice of the words of this people, which they spoken to you. They have done well in all that they have spoken. Now, what he's saying there, again, I think that's an idiomatic phrase. It's not that he thought that that was the right thing. He says, I accept what they have said. Okay, again, I think that's an idiomatic phrase. It's not that he's saying they said the right thing. He says, I will accept what they said and will work with that. Does that make more sense? Okay, he's saying, I've heard them and I will accept their statement. I will work through you. But now he really clears out, and this I think really makes my point perfectly well. Look at the next verse. Oh, that they had such a heart in them to fear me and to guard all my commands always, so that it might be well with them and with their children forever, then they wouldn't need me to speak through somebody. So he's recognizing their frailty, their failings, their insecurities, their fears, and he said, okay, I get it. They can't handle this. Remember, he knows the end from the beginning. He's not surprised this is happening. So what he's telling Moses is, okay, don't argue with them. This is fine. We'll work it this way. Okay, that's what that phrase, I believe, means when he says, I've heard the voice of the words of the people, and they have done well in that they have spoken. In other words, I'll accept it. I get it. They can't handle this. As a matter of fact, they're not going to handle it very well all the way through till the end. There's going to be a consistent pattern here. And this is where he tells us where his understanding is. He knows all the way the end from the beginning, but he says, oh, I wish they would have such a heart in them that they would fear me and guard all my commands always, because then it would be well with them and with their children forever. If they would only have a heart, which is why we did the heart of the matter teaching for 64 parts, if they would get their heart right, and the first step is to fear him appropriately, which is why the fear of Yahweh teaching is one that I used to always recommend people to go to first. Because if you don't figure out how to fear him properly, you're not going to do any of the other stuff. He says, oh, that they had such a heart in them to do these things. Verse 30, go, say to them, return to your tents, but you stand here by me and let me speak to you all the commands and the laws and the right rulings which you are to teach them, and they shall do them in the land which I'm giving them to possess. And you shall guard to do as Yahweh your Elohim has commanded you. Do not turn aside to the right or to the left. Walk in all the way which Yahweh your Elohim has commanded you, so that you live and it be well with you, and you shall prolong your days in the land which you possess. So he's saying is, I will teach you, Moses, the structure. I'm going to give you the light. I'm going to give you the enlightenment, the revelation, the information that brings structure into the darkness. Remember, these are people that just came out of slavery. I can't imagine there was a whole lot of light in that darkness. They didn't have hope. The structure that they had was imposed by Pharaoh, was not of Yah. It only brought cursing and not blessing. He said, but I'm going to give you the instructions that if they will do it and not turn aside right or left, that they will prolong their days, and it will be well with them. And it will be well with them and their children forever. Amen and amen. So we see, again, that this is what's happening. Now look, let's go to Exodus chapter 20. I just want to show this is, again, where the Ten Commandments is being given. And we have, again, this idea of the thick darkness. I kind of put this in my notes. I just want to kind of make sure we touch it real quick. And in verse 18, all the people saw the thunder, the lightning flashes, the sound of the ram's horn, and the mountain smoking. People saw it, and they trembled and stood at a distance. And said to Moses, you speak with us, and we hear, but let not Elohim speak with us, lest we die. Moses said to the people, do not fear, for Elohim has come to prove you, in order that his fear be before you, so that you do not sin. So sin is going to be in darkness. Righteousness is going to be in light. So the people stood at a distance, but Moshe drew near the thick darkness where Elohim was. See, he was not afraid of the darkness that was about to reveal. He approached the darkness that was revealing, seeking after the light. The people were afraid of that. Remember, because darkness can also be a barrier. It was there to hide the form of Elohim. It was there to only allow him to reveal only as much as he wanted to, in the order he wanted to. If there was no darkness, everything would have been revealed and exposed all at the same time. But Moses is not afraid. He goes and he approaches the darkness. And he draws near because that's where Elohim was. Elohim is going to be in a place that is hidden. Not that he's going to be in sin. Let's remember, darkness has different metaphors, but he's also in a place that is hidden to be revealed. But also notice that from this point forward, and nothing has changed, no matter what the people want to think after Acts chapter 2 and blah, blah, blah. Yahweh is still speaking through anointed appointeds who approach the thick darkness. And you have to be ready to receive from those anointed appointeds. That's the way the people chose. Yahweh said, fine, we'll work with that. This is good. This is the way this can work. I can use that. I can work with it. It serves my purposes. Because it forces the people into structure. You don't need structure if everybody's getting direct revelation. You think, why do I need any structure? You see this going on all over the internet now. All the attacks on vertical structure, all the attacks on scriptural structure, all these teachings claiming, church, God's model, and all these other whatever teachings that are out there. And they're all against the proper scriptural vertical structure. The people had decided, and it's never been a verse that said any different, the people had decided that we're going to hear through Moses. Yeah, we started talking to them directly. The people said we can't handle that level of structure. We can't handle being responsible directly just to you. We're going to go through a mediary. And we still have that in Yeshua. We actually had it then because the one speaking to Moses was still a mediary between the Father and Moses, because it still was the Son. Listen to the Father and the Son teaching to kind of get that little nugget sort of explained to you. Okay? Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 28. And again, we're just starting to scratch the surface here of understanding the terms and how they are used. Now remember, words are not exclusively one understanding. That's why we sometimes have darkness as meaning chaos and confusion. Sometimes it's a barrier. Sometimes it's there to hide something that's yet to be revealed or about to be revealed, to be birthed out of. But this is like any word that we look up having multiple understandings and multiple meanings, okay? Now, Deuteronomy 28 and verse 28. This is in the cursing section. It says, Yahweh shall smite you with madness and blindness and bewilderment of heart, and you shall be groping at noon as a blind man gropes in darkness, and not prosper in your ways, and you shall be only oppressed and plundered all the days with no one to save you or deliver you. So we're being told here that there's a connection in the curses, blindness, and bewilderment of heart with darkness. So when you can't see and you don't get, and your heart is bewildered, and you're going to be groping around and like you're floundering around like you just don't know what to do. And I have people call me on a regular basis saying, Rabbi, I don't know what to do. I'm lost. My life is confused. My relationships are confused. My career is confused. All these things are, well, because that's part of the cursings. Get yourself into structure. Structure clears up all of that mess. The more you can start bringing structure into your life, appropriate structure, the more all of the other things will start to fix themselves. Problem is, if you were to be honest with yourself, the more the life miseries that you have, the more you're going to recognize that there are structural issues in your life. When you're suffering, there's structural stuff going on. Maybe there's a husband-wife problem. Maybe there's a ministerial problem. Maybe there's a you and straight with Yahweh and Torah problem. There's some sort of structural problem going on. Fix the structural problem, and everything else starts to come into place. It starts to fall right into alignment. Not immediately, but it all starts to move in the right direction. But you've got to figure out, where's my structural problem? Because he says that's part of the cursing. Yahweh's going to smite us with madness and blindness and bewilderment of heart. And I think some of us feel like we're going mad. Okay? And we're bewildered and we don't know what to do. But that's because there's a darkness going on and we're groping about. Just like a blind person was. Hey, a blind person in the middle of the day, it's noon, it's still dark. They cannot see, there is no light, they have nothing to grope at. So they're groping around just as much as we would if it was in total darkness. They can't see, we can't see. And they're saying, look, you're going to be just groping about. Now, by the way, I think we'll also add to the idea of madness, blindness, and bewilderment of heart. I don't want you to think of the blind person that's in a place they're familiar with and they function very nicely and move around as if they can see, because they're now familiar. Think about if you went to a place that's familiar, but everybody moved everything around to a whole new spot and rearranged all the furniture and rearranged all the physical things so that as a blind person, you wouldn't know, even though you think you should. That's the way some of you feel in your life. This is my life. I should know. I'm an adult. I understand my relationships and my work and my this and whatever. And it feels like all of a sudden everything's gotten flipped over and upside down and now you seem like you're completely lost. Somebody rearranged all the furniture in your life. Sometimes it's a good thing because out of the darkness can be birthed life, light. Can be revealed out of that darkness. Many of you have been in really dark places before he called you to this light. And you had to get to that really dark place before he could birth the light in you. Let's go to Joshua chapter 24. Don't get to go to Joshua very often, but we'll go there. Right at the end there of Joshua. And he's kind of recounting some of the story here to them that they're familiar with. And in verse 5, then I sent Moses and Aaron and plagued Mitzrayim. This is like retelling the story of what happened. Okay, because we have Isaac and Jacob and Esau and other things happening right before that. And then he says, I sent Moses and Aaron and plagued Mitzrayim, and as I did in their midst, and afterwards I brought you out. And I brought your fathers out of the Mitzrayim. You came to the sea, and the Mitzrayites pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Sea of Reeds. And they cried out to Yahweh, and he put thick darkness between you and the Mitzrayites and brought the sea upon them and covered them. And your eyes saw what I did in Mitzrayim, and you dwelt in the wilderness a long time. So he used darkness as a barrier between the light and that which was not of the light, to protect, Just like he used it as a protection on the mountain. If he had exposed himself fully to the Israelites, they would have all died. He needed to be hidden in the darkness. So it's used as a protective barrier at times. So keep that in mind. 1 Samuel chapter 2. 1 Samuel chapter 2. Okay, here we go. 1 Samuel 2. And in verse 1. And Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoices in Yahweh. My horn has been high in Yahweh. My mouth is open wide over my enemies, for I have rejoiced in your deliverance. There is no one set apart like Yahweh, for there is no one besides you, and there is no rock like our Elohim. Do not multiply words so proudly. Proudly let no arrogance come from your mouth, for Yahweh is an El of knowledge, and by him deeds are weighed. Bows of the mighty are broken, and those who stumble shall be girded with strength. The satisfied have hired themselves out for bread, and the hungry have ceased. Even the barren has borne 7, and she who has many children pines away. Yahweh puts to death and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and raises up. Yahweh makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and lifts up. He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the dunghill, to sit with princes and make them inherit a throne of esteem. For the supports of the earth belong to Yahweh, and he has set the world upon them. He guards the feet of his kind ones, but the wrong are silent in darkness, for man does not become mighty by power. Verse 10, those who oppose Yahweh are shattered. From the heavens he thunders against them. Yahweh judges the ends of the earth and gives strength to his sovereign and exalts the horn of his anointed. Okay. So Hannah's praying, and this whole thing is coming out just so we know how awesome and powerful and how much authority Yahweh has. And he shows how those that are from low can be brought high, those are high can be brought down low. But he says, look, the wrong ones, well, first he says he guards the feet of the right ones, the kind ones, but the wrong ones are silent in darkness. They've got nothing they can say. There's nothing they can do against all of this awesomeness. In other words, they will brag, they will claim, they will speak proudly, but it's in the darkness. It's words that go nowhere because it has no real authority. It has no real power. So hopefully we can see that the wrong ones are silent in darkness as Yah raises up and lays low whom he chooses. In other words, they've got nothing they can say about it, is what they're trying to say here. When you're in the darkness, those that are in darkness have no real authority, have no real power. Now, you may feel like you do. Those around you may act like they do, and you may be afraid of them. We talk about this in the Fear of Yahweh teaching, that you may have that false evidence appearing real, that the person who has, what appears to be authority over you has real authority when they don't. He's saying, look, those that think they have real authority, they're silent in the darkness when it comes to Yah doing what he does. He says, those who oppose Yahweh are shattered. They have really nothing they can say. Now, there's nothing that they can do. They can shout, they can think they have authority, they can do whatever they want, but no, there's nothing that they could really do with that. Isaiah chapter 5, let's go to Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 5, verse 13. Therefore my people have gone into exile because they have no knowledge, and their esteemed men are starved, and their crowd dried up with thirst. So he said that people have gone into exile because they have not the knowledge. But not just not knowledge, it's applied knowledge we're talking about here, right? And we know that from Proverbs that the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. They didn't fear Yahweh. He says, therefore the grave has made itself wide and opened its mouth beyond measure. Their splendor and their crowd and their uproar, and he who is exulting within her shall go down into it. And man is bowed down, and mortal man humbled, and the eyes of the proud are humbled. This kind of goes to what we just read. Oh, we're all proud and we're excited, and we think we have so much authority, but in the darkness we are silent. There's really nothing we can say. But Yahweh of hosts is exalted in judgment, and the set-apart El is set apart in righteousness. And lambs shall feed in their pasture, and strangers shall eat in the waste places of the fat ones. Woe to those who draw crookedness with cords of falsehood and sin with wagon ropes. We're saying, look, woe to those that are just wanting to do what they want to do, which goes against what he has said to do. Okay, this is really critical that we're starting to see this. He says, woe to those who draw crookedness with cords of falsehood and sin with wagon ropes, like these big, thick wagon ropes are just drawing sin over to them, who are saying, let him hurry, let him hasten his work so that we see it. And let the counsel of the set-apart one of Israel draw near and come so that we know. So these are people that are trying to force the issue of what Yahweh has said and hasten the day and do things their own way instead of being patient and waiting. Look at verse 20. He says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight. There's where the problem is. The people were scattered. They were sent into exile for lack of knowledge because they were calling good evil and evil good. By the way, we see this today. The whole mainstream of Christianity is telling you that it's evil and it's wrong to keep the commandments. They're calling good evil. There's a guy out there saying that if you try to keep Torah, you've fallen from grace. The only way to receive grace is through Torah observance. But they're calling evil good and good evil. They put darkness for light and light for darkness. So again, they're putting chaos and confusion for structure, and structure they're using to cause chaos and confusion. This is the state we're in. Isaiah 49. And this is going to jump us through a few different ideas of different things as we kind of touch on stuff, kind of chronologically here. Isaiah 49, verse 1. Now remember, he said they were in exile. He was going to say that they're going to be exiled because of this foolishness. Now he's going to talk to the exiles. Listen to me, O coastlands, those are the exiles, and hear you people from afar. Yahweh has called me from the womb, and from my mother's belly has caused my name to be remembered. And he's made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand he hid me and made me a polished shaft. And in his quiver he hid me. So remember, he was hidden in darkness to be revealed. And he said to me, you are my servant, O Israel, in whom I am adorned. And I said, I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for emptiness and in vain. But my right ruling is with Yahweh and my work with my Elohim. And now said Yahweh, who formed me from the womb to be his servant, to bring Yaakov back to him, though Israel is not gathered to him, yet I am esteemed in the eyes of Yahweh, and my Elohim has been my strength. So we're talking about Yeshua here. This is certainly an alluding to him as Messiah coming to do these things. This also goes to why he says things like, I've not come except for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Listen to the Discovering Your Identity teaching. He says, now into verse 6, he goes, and he says, shall it be a small matter for you to be my servant, to raise up the tribes of Yaakov, and to bring back the preserved of Israel, and I shall give you as a light to the nations, to the Gentiles, to be my deliverance to the end of the earth. So we have this prophecy here. He says, and I shall give you as a light to the Gentiles to be my deliverance to the ends of the earth. Well, now let's go to Luke chapter 2 and read how this plays out. Luke chapter 2, and verse 25. And see, there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Shimon, and this man was righteous and dedicated, looking for the comforting of Israel. And the set-apart spirit was upon him, and it had been revealed to him by the set-apart spirit that he would not see death before he sees the Messiah of Yahweh. And he came in the spirit into the set-apart place. And as the parents brought in the child Yeshua to do for him according to the usual practice of the Torah, then he took him up in his arms and blessed Elohim and said, now let your servant go in peace, O Master, according to your word. For my eyes have seen your deliverance, which you have prepared before the face of all the peoples, a light for the unveiling of the Gentiles and the esteem of your people Israel. Isaiah 49. Yes or no? And Joseph and his mother were marveling at what had been said about him. And so you have, wow. He gets there, and this is, so we have Isaiah 49, and then we see this fulfilled here in Luke chapter 2. So he's to be a light for the unveiling, for the revealing to the Gentiles. Not the unveiling of the Gentiles to expose who they are, but for the unveiling and revealing of the light to the Gentiles. This has always been about Israel, and at this point is now being, then he's going to be a light that then will unveil this also to the Gentiles, to the nations. Let's go to Isaiah 51. See if we can squeeze a little bit more in here. Isaiah 51, verse 1. Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness, seeking Yahweh. Look to the rock you were hewn from and to the hole of the pit you were dug from. All right, so look to the two. He's now using a rock and a pit, just like he could be using light and darkness. He could be using different metaphors. Of course, you are hewn from the rock. What are you doing? You're taking something in a rock and you're revealing something out of a rock by carving it, by sculpting the rock. In the pit, you're being hidden in darkness. You're being sent into a place of being hidden. He says, look to the rock from which you were hewn from and to the hole you were dug from. Look to Abraham your father and to Sarah who bore you. For he was alone when I called him and I blessed him and increased him. For Yahweh shall comfort Zion, and he shall comfort all her waste places. For he makes her wilderness like Eden, and her desert like the garden of Yahweh. Joy and gladness are found in it, thanksgiving and the voice of song. Listen to me, my people, and give ear to me, O my nation. For the Torah goes forth from me, and my right ruling I set as a light to the peoples. Oh, now he's going to be straightforward with us. The Torah goes forth from me, and my right ruling I set as a light to the people. Well, we already were just told in chapter 49 that he was given as a light to the people. The servant is a light to the people. Yeshua is the light that's for the people. The Torah, this is again more proof that Yeshua is the walking, talking, living Torah. And so here we go, verse 5. My righteousness is near, my deliverance shall go forth, and my arms judge peoples. Coastlands wait upon me, that's the scattered people, and for my arm they wait expectantly. Lift up your eyes to the heavens and look on earth beneath, for the heavens shall vanish like smoke, and the earth wear out like a garment. But those who dwell in it die as gnats. And those who dwell in it die as gnats. But my deliverance is forever, and my righteousness is not broken. Listen to me, you who know righteousness, a people in whose heart is my Torah. Do not fear the reproach of men, nor be afraid of their revilings. He says, the Torah goes forth from me. He says, and let there be light, and light came to be. The Torah comes forth from me, and it's a what? A light to the peoples. It is to be a light to the peoples. I think I didn't fit. Okay, there was one more verse. I'm like reading my notes wrong. Okay, in verse 8, for a moth eats them like a garment and worm eats them like wool, but my righteousness forever and my deliverance to all generations. Okay, so that was to go to 8. This was to stay at 6. All right. So the Torah is going to go forth. It's going to be a light. We're just getting to start to scratch the surface here. We're going to stop here, but we're just starting to scratch the surface. So let's just go through the beginning again just to remind ourselves. Darkness is a natural state at the beginning. It's a place where something is birthed from. It's a place where something is hidden for later revealing. This can be a frightening place. It's a place devoid of active, useful light. Actively useful light. A barrier to keep something in or out, and the greater the darkness, the greater the light that is revealed. We're starting to see that play forth, and now we're seeing its connection to Torah and Yeshua as we get into the prophets, and we're going to see so much more. I hope this was a good start. Let's pray. Father, we come before you. And we are so excited to be coming out of the darkness and into the light. We're excited about what will be birthed and continue to be birthed out of the darkness. We're excited about understanding your light, your purpose, your structure, your processes, your protocols, how you would have things to be. Father, we are just so in need of that structure. Father, we are groping about at noon as blind people. We are just as if everybody is not only blind, but all of our furniture has been rearranged. We just don't know what to do. And the more we seek you, the more we see light, the more all becomes revealed, the more structure comes in, the more things come into order and out of chaos and out of confusion. So, Father, help us to seek your light, to draw near the darkness that has your stuff hidden. Not the darkness of sin and death and all, but the darkness where the light is coming out of, the darkness where the light will be revealed. Help us to be not afraid of that, but to be filled with anticipation and excitement and hope in seeing the revelation of that light. Father, help us to have such a heart in us that we would accept the light, covenant with you, obey and guard and cling to what is revealed in the light. So, Father, we want to thank you now. We want to ask your patience with us, your compassion, your mercy on us as we seek to have the light, Yeshua, our Messiah, the Torah, the truth, guide and lead all things in our lives. So, Father, again, we thank you. We praise you as we start this journey in anticipation. In the name and the authority above all names, Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen. Amen. Amen.